Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back in to talk about how this season is for Mythic Plus, what's been good, what's been bad, and really where I think that the community sort of stands in a few different ways. Season 2 has been a lot better than I think most seasons of M Plus that we've had lately, with the exception being something like Dragonflight Season 3, especially when you compare it to The War Within Season 1, which had like a brutal progression curve, and 12s were just like this massive wall that was very difficult for people to climb initially. I think Season 2 has been a great upgrade. They've realized in the community that everybody wants to be able to do 10s and 12s to get the max gear rewards, and it feels pretty crappy just running face first into a wall like we did in Season 1, and they've made a lot of improvements to that, making it so that you're not as bloated as like the 30s that we were doing in Dragonflight Season 3, but you're able to get up higher into these dungeons while also still having to care about mechanics along the way. That's been a huge benefit, and I think we really ended up seeing it when it came to a lot of like the stats and graphs, especially those for Dungeon M Plus runs. In previous expansions, you saw the Season 1 of like Dragonflight be like super crazy high up, and then it starts falling off a cliff. Here you can see in Season 1, there also was the kind of cliff drop that we are pretty familiar with after the start of an expansion, but I think so far Season 2 has done a pretty good job of trying to avoid this sort of collapse. And you can see it in what they call the normalized runs here, where it shows the percentage drop really from their starting point. And as you can see, a lot of the times early in the season, just before week 8, which is really important, you were seeing quite a bit of stickiness to the community staying around. Now, week 8 is really important because that is the 11.15 week, which I think has probably been the biggest failure thus far when it comes to like their patches, is that the 0.5 patch really stunk. There was like nothing there, and only until recently did we get our horrific visions, did we get our turbo boost and everything along those lines. And you can see in the stats, the massive candy rush or sugar rush of when we ended up hitting that turbo boost moment. It was really exciting. We got to just stack up into a bunch of gear. And here we can compare to the last 6 seasons of M+. And you can see in tan is Dragonflight Season 3, which was always very hyped. And then in green is The War Within Season 2. And so you can see we kind of hit a point around that turbo boost patch of a similar level as to what Dragonflight Season 3 did. But Dragonflight Season 3 and Dragonflight Season 1 have still been a lot more popular, which I think kind of makes sense given this expansion seems to be kind of a bridge to the real meat and potatoes of like the Midnight expansion and like the Last Titan expansion. So that's kind of how I view it so far. And I'm not sure about you guys, but I'd love to also hear it. The normalized version, again, how much of the percentage drop actually does look pretty good for War Within Season 2, as they're actually keeping a pretty decent amount of the player base relative to what a lot of the other seasons have actually thrown at them. Kind of akin to the same retention rate as we saw at a Dragonflight Season 1, which is pretty good, but it's, not everything. So what they've done right has definitely been trying to add some additional power and some additional strength over time, because I think a huge reason why you see a massive collapse in a bunch of these different seasons, especially as we saw like War Within Season 1, is when you start getting capped out on progression. And what I mean by that is the average player, maybe not the ones that are liking and subscribing to my YouTube content to always improve their gameplay, but the average player is not going to go out of their way to always be looking at new routes, new information, how to always improve. They're probably going to get off work, have some dinner, queue up with some buds, crack open a beer, and get a couple dungeons done, which is awesome. And when you're not getting any more power, you're not getting any more juice, you're not getting any more good vault rewards, you might be pushing the same buttons and you're not able to push any higher in the infinitely scaling content. When your stats and player power does not increase infinitely and you're doing infinite progression, well, your skill has to go up or your gear has to go up, or sometimes both of them do. And when you have a brick wall of like the War Within Season 1 in orange, there's no it's not a surprise that there's a hardcore collapse that can happen as a result. And so I think what they've done well in Season 2 is actually add a bit steadier of progression, and you can really see it with the spike for the turbo boost and the dinar system getting added into the mix. I do think that it was really late, because once you start to kind of like start the trend of these like deep collapses, as we can see. I'll even go backwards to make it a little bit clearer. In this green bar, you can see they went from minus 12%, 14, minus 10, and then down to negative 26, and then 31, and then 33. You see this really sharp decline as players are kind of just moving on. They play for a couple weeks and then they kind of leave. But when they go into week 8, I feel like this is when the steepest decline happened, where people are saying, oh, should I come back for this patch? Oh, there's nothing going on. Oh, I'll just leave. And then once they actually started getting some borrowed power into the mix, once they started actually making it so that the people who are really dedicated to hitting certain goals can actually hit those goals, things started improving. And I think that they're probably, and I'm hoping at least, that they're going to flatten out quite a bit more as we're about to get the new borrowed power belt, and people are kind of getting like their max gear. They're getting fully geared and everything after the turbo boost. So one of the things that they kind of have to do every season is find an effective way to continuously increase the power of the player base. Now, we had that in the past when it came to like Battle for Azeroth. You'd have the neck level and you'd be farming up your islands. And I know a lot of people didn't enjoy that, myself included, but it kept on giving you power, which helped in raids and it helped in Mythic Plus. So you were getting like 1% stronger every single week. And when they take those things away, yeah, you don't have to do the island grind anymore, but you're still not that strong. And I think that's a huge factor for just longevity for an M plus season. Now, on the side of class balance, it's been, better. Better than season 1, I would argue. But there still is, kind of a mono comp of, the Vengeance Demon Hunter and all of the other good stuff. Thankfully, it does seem like there's actually a couple different options when it comes to healers that can do high-level dungeons, which is always great. And we've already seen as well in the past that there's a really good mix of damage dealers that are doing 20s and higher. In fact, you actually have an insane amount of specs that have done 20s, which is really, really good to see. And the difference is like some people doing 20s versus some people doing 22s. So I would say in a lot of areas, DPS balance and healer balance is improved. It's not perfect, but it's definitely improved. But one of the big issues, and I know Tettle's made a video talking about this too, is the tank population. And so not only is it really, 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 really bad to have one tank just be on top, but I think it's also really bad in general to have just a lack of like consistent tuning when the representation is so insanely skewed. Like if you were going to, is there an option to go only by tanks? Well, I'm sure you could find some of those stats for just the tanks on their own, and VDH just like blotting out the sun of it only being VDHs. I mean, you could even go to Raider.io's like all runs leaderboard for tanks. Here's actually a better way to do it. You go 15s and up and it's 54% Vengeance Demon Hunter. Yeah, and it's probably even worse the higher up that you end up going, right? As I'm sure we would all know. That super, super frustrating. Healers also have a similar problem, little bit less of an issue than tanks do right now. Damage dealers, yeah, there's still some of those issues that they could be working on, and I wish that they would. And this, I think, is really where the patch maintenance, I guess you could say, comes into play. Obviously, I play Disc Priest, and I love being able to have it when my class is good. Everybody does, let's be real. But what doesn't make too much sense to me is when you have all these patches that, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like have had so much less class balance and adjustments than we've been used to, especially in like moments like Dragonflight. And we recently got like buffs to like tank threat, which feels like it almost like disproportionately impacts Vengeance Demon Hunter because they have so many weird things that just do 0 threat for no reason. But the fact that they haven't added anything else into the table for other tanks. And I think a huge issue with this is their sort of like power creep and bloat when it comes to crowd control abilities, in that the dungeons and a lot of the boss fights are very fun, but the trash packs are just chocked full of casters. And it's a game, especially as you push into higher levels, of rounding up all these mobs together, using Silent Sigil, using Beam, and using a billion different stops until you get Beam back again, and just following up with Beam, and then hopefully the pack has all died. That stuff, I am so looking forward to a game like Fellowship, which, if you don't know, is basically like a WoW M+ standalone game. I'm very, very hopeful for this game, because of the lack of bloat that they have coming out. Not sponsored, not an ad, none of that kind of stuff. But what I'm really, really hopeful about with this game is that you have like a hard reset to sort of like an M+ game mode. Not having every class with like 2 or 3 crowd control abilities, or 2 or 3 or even 4 active defensive abilities, which are changing around how you're dealing with encounters and everything. That actually looks just like a night elf. But the point stands. Bloat has gotten like way out of control in WoW, and shockingly, the classes that survive help your allies survive. Crowd control monsters, and deal a bunch of prio damage are like really, really good. And being able to specialize into the niches, the raid buffs, the crowd control, on and on and on it goes, has built these sort of mono comps. And that's not fun. And while some people are going to enjoy playing those classes, nobody feels like they are going to have fun being forced into a comp that they don't want to play, or forced into a spec that they don't want to play. That kind of stuff, not great. Having one comp in 17% of samples with an 88% success rate, that's a little insane. Onto that one. What's also really important in this season has been the resilient Keystones. And that, I think, has actually resulted in probably one of the hardest seasons to get title I think we've ever had. The title right now is less than 1,000 players, which in most seasons you easily have over 1,000. You can see they have some, scuffery here, but usually there's like 12 to 1,300 players very consistently getting title. 1,400 in Dragonflight Season 3. I want to say it was like 1,100 in War Within Season 1. As I take a second for it to load. Actually, it's like 1,500. Yeah. So there's much fewer players who are able to get as high. And it's enormously, enormously competitive. I think a big reason for that is definitely like the resilient Keystone system, in that you can actually sit there and sort of grind out these higher level dungeons, and you are not having to go back and do as much homework keys, or basically leveling up a keystone so that you can actually do it for score. So you're not having a key deplete from an 18 down to 17 or 16 or whatever. It just stops at 18. You level it up from 18 to 19. Okay, you got it onto 19. You go do the 19 and so on. And that, I think, is really going to make it so that title is going to be very exclusive. And I think it's actually a good thing, even though I know people are going to be upset where like bad players might be able to get into a resilient group and just grind it out, and eventually they'll time it or something if they roll the dice enough times, which I get that it could be a complaint, but that's also been how M+ kind of is. It's like if you play the game enough, if you roll the dice enough times, you are going to chest these dungeons, you're going to make progress to a certain extent. So I'm not too stressed out about that. And I think that maybe they can make some adjustments to Resilient or something along those lines. I'd especially love it if you have Resilient 18s and you go to like 19 and you have like 2 attempts before it depletes or something like that. That, I think, would be a great way to also kind of just help people get used to the sort of progression, because resilient Keystones are honestly like long overdue, despite some of these negatives that people get upset about with like sales, or, people bringing their buddy into a dungeon that they have no experience in and just keep on grinding it till they get it. WoW's really been built around wiping on a boss over and over again until you get it. And in a lot of cases, it's very difficult to sit there for a 30-minute dungeon and stay focused, as opposed to a lot of like 6 to 10-minute boss fights in WoW. There are absolutely differences. Race to World First rating is much different than Hall of Fame rating, which is much different than people getting cutting edge right now. A lot of those things can be very different. But I think it's always been very silly in WoW, where you do a dungeon, you do a high-level dungeon, you got 1 attempt at it, and if you fail, you're done, and you just get omega punished, and you have to go kill easier bosses until you can go to the hard one again, which has been very, very silly. And so I like that Resilient has existed. I like that they're experimenting with it, and I hope that it's something that they keep around long-term, because I think it's something that actually like makes players better over time, or at least it makes competitive-minded players who want to improve better over time. You're always going to have the players who just want to like face roll into a dungeon and not care about it at a high level. That always happens. But I think for the average player in the community, if they just want to do their 10s or 12s for a vault and they get their resilient level, they're probably stoked, because if they mess up a pull, they can just say, hey, just go again. Let's just try it again. They'll go again, and they probably chest it the next time. That, I think, is a huge boon for like the entirety of the community, when they want and they really want to make sure that 10s and 12s are much easier than Season 1, which is a good thing. and they want to make sure that that average player is not getting Omega punished. So those are all like really big positives in my book. Going back to our topic about the amount of runs that we had every season, I do think that their borrowed power activation is still a little bit too slow and still a little bit too annoying to deal with. As I mentioned, patch 11.15 really sucked, brought almost nothing to the table. You see a massive sugar rush whenever week 11 comes around and the turbo boost comes around with, I believe, I wish they would add commas, but I'm pretty sure that says 1.4 million total runs of M+ dungeons, which is pretty sick compared to the almost 2 million total runs at the start of the season. 11 weeks later, you get 1.4 mil. That's a lot of people running Keystones, and I'm sure a lot of it was lower levels and everything, but still getting people to play the game and want to play the game, getting excited to play the game are all big benefits. I do think they have to really sort of rein in and get a good idea. And I would think that these charts would help a lot of highlighting when the like massive drops are kind of coming around, as you can even see some of the peaks from like the 0.5 patches that you could see for something like Dragonflight Season 1 coming around, bringing a lot of people back before it starts kind of returning to the mean. It seems like they haven't quite mastered that yet, and a lot of it is going to depend on them adding borrowed power mid-season at small levels that it's not super irritating, but also making it important enough so you're going to push up higher Keystones. I don't know if this is the perfect system for it. I kind of think I would prefer having something akin to what progression for your borrowed power like neck was after you did like the initial grinds. Because a lot of my memory in BFA was you had to grind an insane amount at the start of every patch, do all these world quests. It was kind of a nightmare. And then you could kind of go play the game and you only had to do a little bit of chores. I don't think that chores should be that heavy. And if they do, they should probably be supplemented by like just doing lots of M+, or doing like one zone a week or something like that of world quests to get made easier for alts, something along those lines. But regardless, borrowed power is going to exist, and it's pretty necessary in infinitely scaling content to still make you a little bit stronger every week. Otherwise, you run face first into a wall. What they could also be doing, and what I think is also really missing, is probably some better quality of life for the Keystone system. And they can kind of do this while also encouraging you to go out into the world. And what I mean by that is I would love for there, just as you could have the NPC to talk to lower your Keystone level, I would love it if, I don't know, what are they called? Resonance crystals? I haven't really done any world content besides the beginning of the expansion. And I have, whatever these currencies are out in the world. I would love it if these world currencies could then be used to make a Keystone not deplete one time and you can only buy one of them a week. Or make it so that you could spend these currencies to re-roll your Keystone. And it gets a little bit more expensive if you just keep spamming it or something, so you can't do it infinitely. But if you're bored and you're signing up in LFG and not getting invited to groups, you can still work towards something that is going to help you later on down the line. And I think that it would be such a great opportunity for just kind of the game in general to say, hey, here's things that you might want to do, you could optionally do just from, gameplay perspective that might be nice. That being said, I think that the overall systemic changes that they've made to the game, getting rid of a lot of the seasonal affixes when they basically just stopped supporting them, trying to make sure that healer balance in particular is better, the changes they made to help healing out compared to Dragonflight have been better, how they squished M+, and then kind of reversed the squish after Dragonflight Season 4 and War Within Season 1. I think getting away from that hardcore squished environment is also good. And I think the resilience system's been good too. I do wish that they would add a couple more things to sort of encourage you to do some kind of world content without making it feel forced. I think that would be excellent to see. And then doing kind of just a better job of dealing with the borrowed power over time. Because I feel like we know it needs to happen, but having the sugar rushes of a bunch of power for a week and then it kind of falling off and then a bunch of power for a week and then it falling off is not quite it. So hopefully it's an area that they still experiment with. Hopefully Fellowship gives them some good competition. We'll see. But if you're enjoying the opinion pieces and stuff, be sure to like and subscribe. I'd love to know what you guys think about this kind of stuff as well. Since we're kind of at our slow point in the season, it's a nice time to be able to sit back, take stock of where we're at, and get ourselves ready for Season 3, which I am super pumped about. Take it easy, guys. Thanks for all the patrons for making all this content possible. If you want to join them, check them out in the description down below. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope y'all enjoyed it. I'll catch y'all next time.